when her milk came in.
40 weeks for men. 40 weeks for men. 40 weeks for men.
So we are in week 36 of development or gestation. Think about self-mastery and how that makes life more manageable. So we're going to be contemplating and we're going to try and learn from that together. I'll try and witness the man experience, talk about society at large, and call listeners to action at the end. So let's start off with the first part where we learn together and try and think about week 36 of development. Quite a few things are happening, but obviously the baby's getting ready for its own self-mastery outside of the mother's tummy. But there is something I really want to highlight here. So depending on observational studies and also looking at babies that are born a bit premature at week 36, we can ascertain what's happening. Most of the time, for most babies on average, the ability to digest breast milk is there. So what I mean by digest is you essentially make bigger things into small things so that your body can manage it better. And babies are literally designed to make sure that they can handle breast milk well. They can handle milk better than solid food. And when you may already be there, but when you get to the point when a baby's young, very small, they need milk and fluids more so. And then later on, they get onto solid food. But at this point, at week 36, we like to highlight the fact that the majority of babies now have the ability to digest breast milk. So make sure that the important calories in breast milk go from bigger to smaller so that the breast milk is more manageable by the body. So yeah, we're going to talk about that more as the episode goes on, but that's an interesting fact. Also, I think what I'm going to try and do in the show notes is I'm going to try and make sure that I put some interesting, important understanding of the importance of breastfeeding. There are so many benefits for breastfeeding if possible. And I'm going to make sure I try and link that for our knowledge base. And actually, it's funny because in previous episodes, I've shown my disdain for breastfeeding and how, as a dad, as a man, I found that difficult, or I found it difficult when my babies were small. But I'm glad that all three of them were breastfed, and actually, even though I found it difficult, it was a real blessing to them. So anyway, I'll link that important information in the show notes in the description so that we can learn together more. Now it's time to witness the man experience. So in my experience, when I'm thinking about making things bigger to smaller and digestion and helping the baby breastfeed, all these things, I'm thinking more so about how all three of them were breastfed, yes. But there's one thing that I wonder if the listeners resonate with. Maybe not, maybe so. My wife, when she was breastfeeding all the babies, so there was this phenomenon, I call it a phenomenon, that I think is a wonderful thing, but it depends on what you like and what's important to you. But I thought it was quite cool. So my wife has the ability to breastfeed the children as they grew. But then because her body was doing that and get ready to breastfeed, when her milk came in, her breast became massive. The engorgement was real. Now, I obviously, being a silly man, I enjoyed looking at her breasts, but I couldn't touch them. it's very important I did not touch them at all because they were painful and sore. And I had to learn a lot about self-control and self-mastery since we're thinking about that this episode. I'm realizing actually not touching what you want to touch is part of self-mastery and self-control. And I learned that when thinking about the breast milk that my babies enjoyed. So now we're going to try and think about society at large. So the tradition around here is going back to the Bible, learning from that and thinking about what's happening at week 36 when we think about the baby. So I think a really good verse that I think we can read today in order to think about this topic better is, it's in the New Testament, the book of Hebrews, or the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 5, verse 12. So I'll go ahead and read that from the English Standard Version using my advice here. You need milk, not solid food. So yes, so we're thinking about the ability of the baby to digest. We're thinking about breast milk and all these things that are good about it. So obviously we read the Hebrews chapter 5 verse 12. So it's really important that actually the book of Hebrews is quite hard to understand without good context of the Old Testament law, the law of Moses. So actually there's some really good stuff in the internet, good content to understand the book of Hebrews better. But I think a good way to understand it is we need to understand the Jewish context. Because then when you understand that, the book of Hebrews comes alive. But obviously we're looking here at Hebrews chapter 5 verse 12. And I think this is really important to realize that actually here the writer of the letter to the Hebrews is talking about maturity and the importance of self-mastery being, he sort of like puts alongside that metaphor of the baby needing milk and not being able to tolerate solid food, and us thinking about our own self-mastery or maturity. Specifically here it's talking about Christian maturity in terms of your own ability to like learn the scriptures and like be higher up in terms of maturity when it comes to walking the Christian life. But I think there are things that we can learn here as birth partners, dads, that maturity, self-mastery makes life more manageable. And actually we want to transfer to the point where we're not only just having milk in life, but we're actually having solid food. So obviously I'm drawing the metaphor here, like this is my interpretation of it based on what we're talking about in terms of week 36 of the development of the baby. And we're thinking about maturity and self-mastery. But I think there is a truth here that maturing makes life more manageable. Okay, now it's time to call listeners to action. So the call to action this week is based on the whole topic, to be honest. It's how do we make things from big to small?